In this episode, we cover why for high income earners, a rental property is not the best way to build wealth. Let's get started.
Let's get some money.
From New Money, New Problems, it's the New Money, New Problems podcast, a show for successful professionals searching for the tools they need to navigate financial opportunities and obstacles they've never seen. Negotiating compensation, purchasing your first investment property, helping your family with money, the highs and lows of entrepreneurship. New Money brings new problems that require new solutions. Join us as we work through them together. I'm Brenton Harrison, and this is the New Money, New Problems podcast. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the New Money, New Problems podcast. We are back to our regularly scheduled programming after taking a pause last week to cover some student loan regulations that you need to know. So if you're someone who didn't have student loans and last week you were annoyed that you didn't have an episode that was relevant to you, I am hoping that this one is the reverse of that, because this is a topic that I've wanted to cover in the past and I think is relevant to everyone who listens to New Money, New Problems, specifically those who have new money and new problems. You are in the middle of your career, you're a high income earner, and if you are in that scenario, it is highly likely that at some point you have either already dipped your toe into the water when it comes to investment real estate, or at the very least you've considered it. And today's episode is a two-parter. It's the first of two parts. In this episode, we're going to talk about all of the reasons why, when it comes to high income earners, a rental property is not, in my opinion, a great way to build wealth. And in part two, we're going to talk about, if you have an interest in investment real estate, all of the things that you can do to make it a great way to build wealth. And I got to build some caveats and some context into this episode. And the first one is this: there is a little bit of clickbait when I say that a rental property is not a great way to build wealth, because I am focusing on a single rental property. And there's a real reason that I'm talking about that, as compared to saying rental property in general is not a great way to build wealth, because obviously that wouldn't make sense if you know my background. I've told you I'm the son of a realtor. I grew up going to open houses and riding in the car with my mom before she sticks lawn signs on a property. I have been around people my whole life who invested in investment real estate, including my parents. I have been a rental property owner in the past, as I've shared. And I would also share that many of our wealthiest clients with whom we work are people who have had a significant interest in rental real estate. So I clearly believe that it can be done, and it is one of the best, matter of fact, ways to build significant wealth at scale. But that is the key part: at scale. And what I want to focus on today are the people who are dipping their toe into investment real estate and thinking that they can get one or even two rental properties and it will somehow unlock this great door to wealth that just wasn't a possibility without investing in that property. As a matter of fact, I would say in most cases, when we see someone who is already a high income earner and they decide to buy an investment property or two, they often find themselves disappointed for various reasons, and it did not work the way that they thought it might. And in this episode, we're going to share why. So enough with the pretext and the context. Let's get into some of the reasons why, in my opinion, a rental property is not a great way to build wealth. And the first are for people who buy their first home, a starter home and the like, and they feel that when they leave that property, the goal is to not sell it. They're going to go into their new house and they're going to turn their first starter home into an investment property. And the reason that this often doesn't work out is, while this is something that you can definitely do, matter of fact, it's probably the easiest way to become a rental property owner, is when you do, it often compromises your ability to actually get a better home for you and your family. And a lot of it has to do with how people finance the purchase of their first home versus how they finance subsequent purchases. If you're looking on screen, you're actually looking at a scenario where we're comparing what it looks like for someone to buy their first home as a first-time home buyer. And in their situation, they might qualify for a significantly reduced down payment, often as low as 3.5%. Let's assume that they're buying a $300,000 property. A 3.5% down payment would mean $10,500 down, and 1% in closing cost would be an additional $2,895. So all in, for their first property, this person gets into a $300,000 starter home for $13,395. Now let's assume that they stay in that property for 5 years, and after that 5th year, they decide that they're ready for an upgrade and they want to get into another property, but they don't want to sell their first home. They want to use it as an investment property. Well, that's much more difficult to do because now that they don't qualify for a first-time homebuyer loan, they'll likely find the smallest amount they can put down is 10%. And let's assume that that next home is a $450,000 property. Costs have risen in the area and they want a truly upgraded property. So now 10% down payment on $450,000 is $45,000. And 1% closing costs on their loan is another $4,050. So whereas they got into their first property for less than $15,000, their next home requires $49,050 for them to buy that property. And if they don't sell that first home so they can use it as an investment property, it means that they have to find a way in that 5-year period to save enough that they can give up almost $50,000 of down payments and closing costs of their own money and be in a position where they're liquid enough and have enough reserves to now float the maintenance costs of 2 households. You also have to consider, especially if you live in a city where the home prices are increasing significantly, whether after 5 years going from a home that's maybe $300,000 to a home that's $450,000 actually represents an improvement or a progression in the level of home in which you live. And to illustrate this, I want to show you the home that I was actually born into, 214 Cumberland Hills Drive in Madison, Tennessee. Now, this home was a nice home, but if you know anything about my family's story, you'll remember that my parents bought this property for less than $100,000 in the 80s with money that was given to them by my grandfather from an insurance settlement after he was literally hit by a dump truck. So they bought this house for less than $100,000 in the 80s. You can see that this home is now worth $715,800. This is not the fanciest home in the world. It's probably 25 minutes outside of downtown Nashville. But more importantly, I want to drive home the point of whether after 5 years you can actually get an improvement in the level of your home by showing you that this home that in 2026 is worth $700,000 in 2021, just 5 years ago, was worth $410,000. So what many people often find when they have a goal of buying a home and then eventually getting a better home and keeping the one they have as an investment property is that after the amount of time that they waited to do so, not only does it take a significant amount of money that they would have to save to put as a down payment on the next property, when they find out what new houses are and what it takes to actually get a better home than the one in which they're living, it takes so much to do so that it almost requires them to sell their first home to get the equity out of that property and use it to buy a new home that they really do consider an improvement in their style of living. The next reason that for many high income earners, a single or a couple rental properties is not a great way to build wealth is because it is very hard to actually turn a profit that's of any significance when you buy a property or two. I'll go even further and say when you actually add up all of the costs that people are paying to maintain a property, it's more likely, unless you have lucked up and bought a property a long time ago in a city that's just booming in value now, that you're going to lose money in terms of the year-to-year costs associated with a rental. And when you calculate not just the payment of the property, but also the repairs and maintenance of the property and the cost of a property manager and what you would have to charge to, after all of those expenses, clear an amount that you consider significant, it in some cases will require an amount of rent that you simply can't charge given the value of the property and what's available in the surrounding areas. To drive this point home, if you're looking on screen, I pulled up another property that to me screams rental property. It is a 3-bedroom, 2-bath home. It's 1,056 square feet, and it's in Ashland City, Tennessee. So I would say this is probably 25-30 minutes from downtown Nashville. It, to me, for a high-income earner, is the perfect encapsulation of a home that maybe is not a place where you would live at this stage in your career, but the price of the property, which is listed at $330,000, is just manageable enough that you can find a way to have this be a part of your portfolio. Nothing fancy about the property, but it seems to have good bones, and it's not too far that you couldn't go check on it every once in a while if you so chose. Now let's take that $330,000 list price and let's go to a mortgage calculator to get an estimate of how much you would pay for the mortgage. We're taking our $330,000. We're going to assume a 20% down payment, which I'll explain why in a second, and a 7% interest rate, which I'll also explain. We're going to do a 30-year mortgage on this property, and you can see that an estimate of homeowners insurance, property taxes, and the principal and interest means an estimated payment of $2,344.90 per month. But remember, we also have maintenance. You'll see people who use a rule of thumb that says you should set aside 1 to 4% of your home's value for maintenance costs each year. And even if we're going to be conservative and say that it's 1%, that adds about $275 a month to the monthly cost of maintaining this property. Let's also assume that we're having a property manager manage this home on our behalf and that we want to profit even $250 a month on this property. Well, that means that after the property manager, the taxes, the principal and interest, the mortgage itself, and the maintenance cost that we're estimating, that in order to net $250 a month, we would actually need to charge our tenants just under $3,200 a month to meet our objective. Now, the first question that I would ask you is for a property that's 1,000 square feet, 30 minutes from the city of Nashville, do you think you could even command a $3,200 monthly rent on this property? The second question I would ask you is, even if you can find someone to rent it for $3,200 a month, is it worth the $66,000 down payment, the $3,000 to $6,000 worth of closing costs, the maintenance costs associated with that property, the liability associated with having a tenant in that property, all so you could have an extra $250 a month? Now, if you made $30,000, $40,000 a year, would $250 a month be significant? Absolutely. But for someone who makes $100,000, $200,000, $300,000, is it worth all of the effort, the expense, and the lack of liquidity for $250? I would say in most cases, they would consider it not worth the headache. And that effort, that amount, that lack of liquidity actually bleeds into the next point. We talked about people who are trying to have their primary residence eventually be an investment property, but let's talk about people who just want an investment property. Unlike the first-time home buyers program where you can get into a home for 3.5% down, and like even your second or subsequent properties where you can have a down payment as low as 10%, for investment properties, 20% down payment is the standard. If you're not living in the home, you have to put down that 20% down payment, and interest rates, mortgage rates on an investment property are higher than what you'll find on a personal residence. And when it comes time to make the decision of giving up that much capital, remember, we're talking about people who are already high income earners. They have probably gotten a position where they either have significant assets in the market or this is their first opportunity to put significant assets in the market, and they're deciding whether to do so or whether to put it on an investment property. You might start to look at the return on investment that you're getting for the dollars that you're giving up. And for our example, the $250 a month that this person is trying to profit is $3,000 per year, but they had to give up about $70,000 to do it. Do you know the return that they would have to get in the market on $70,000 to generate that same $250 a month? 4.3%. We're talking about 1% higher than what you're getting on high yield savings accounts is all you would need to earn in the market to generate that same return. So if you were in that situation, would you want to lose access to that $70,000? Because once you've put it down, it's gone unless you're going to borrow it back to generate $250 a month? Or would you want to put that money into an investment account, retain access to it, and have an opportunity to significantly outpace what's needed to generate $250 a month? Now, it's not as simple as that because you have a home that could increase in value. That $330,000 property could be the $700,000 home that we talked about in my first example. You also have tenants that are covering some of the costs. So while the home might increase in value, they're also paying down the mortgage for you. So I don't want to present this as if there's no benefits to giving up that capital, but the amount of capital it takes to put down on one property that may or may not work out may not be as appealing as diversifying it across an entire stock market that has more companies at play, more data available, and likely, at least historically, higher odds of having a significant positive return than whatever information you know about that one house. The next reason is that for most people, a rental property does not help significantly on their taxes. Now, real estate does offer some significant benefits in terms of the fact that there are several elements associated with property that are itemized deductions. One of them is the property taxes that you pay on a home. You also can deduct the mortgage interest that you pay on the mortgage for that property. Now let's look at the potential tax benefit from owning an investment property. As we'll share in part 2 of this series, if you have an investment property and you can clear certain thresholds, things you might have seen online that we will cover in that episode, like it being a short-term rental or you having real estate professional status, then there are certain things that you can do with that property that are significantly beneficial potentially when it comes to your tax return. But if you don't have those things in place and you just simply have an investment property or two, then one of the things that you're going to run into when it comes to using an investment property to benefit your taxes is the active versus passive rules with the IRS. What that means is that when you have an active work activity, you can use the losses from that active activity to offset other income on your tax return. If my wife earns W-2 income of, say, $100,000, and I have a business where I'm actually trying to turn a profit, but because of upfront expenses and other things, I show a $25,000 net loss, I can use the $25,000 net loss from my active activity to reduce my wife's $100,000 income. So now the amount that's going to be on our tax return is going to be no greater than $75,000. So you would think that if you have a rental property where you're losing money, that you would be able to do the same thing. I would say for the majority of people, it's not the case because real estate, unless you have certain things in place, is considered a passive activity. And you cannot use the loss from a passive activity to net out active income. This means that unless I have cleared certain thresholds, which are more difficult to do than most people realize, that I could have a $25,000 loss on my investment property and I do not get to claim any of it on my tax return. I'm stuck at $0. And the irony of this rule, the passive activity rule, is that for most people, owning real estate is not a passive activity. It's annoying. I told you that I owned an investment property, my wife and I, and it was one of the most miserable experiences of my life. We were getting calls at all times of the night because a toilet was leaking. There was something wrong with something in the bedrooms. There was an ant problem, this and that. And even when we had someone else manage the property, they still have to give us those reports. We still have to go through the process of finding someone to fix it. We still have to pay someone to fix it. So for all of that, the annoyance, the extra risk, and so on and so forth, to not even be able to use it and claim a loss, it's kind of a kick in the teeth. This is just one of the many reasons that I've articulated that a property or two is not as useful and does not have as much utility as people expect when they go into the process. And if you're totaling all these things up, what I'm trying to paint the picture of is a person who is earning more money. They have access to more capital, but they don't necessarily have the ability to not have access to that capital. They still need to be liquid. They still have other things in their life that they at least need to be able to touch that money if needed. They're concerned about the viability and the stability of their job. They have other people that they're responsible for. Their children are in private school. They're earning more money. They're getting more bonuses, and maybe they're ready to put that money in the market, or maybe they're interested in buying an investment property. And I'm just telling you an informed opinion, not just an opinion, but an informed opinion from people who have been in that exact same situation. It's not uncommon for them to find that doing all of that for one property will not lead to a significant enough surplus on a monthly basis to outweigh the cons of losing access to that capital. Now, what you will find, and we'll discuss that significantly next week, is for people who decide to do it at scale and not just buy a property or two, but buy 5 properties, 10 properties, or they're in a position where they commit themselves to real estate as an active activity, which opens up a range of tax benefits. Or they started early, so they bought property when they were in their 20s and early 30s, and now, given the amount of time that they've owned those properties, they end up in a situation where they're earning high income now, but they have had a decade worth of growth in that properties. There are several scenarios where it can not only be worth it, but it can be, as I said in the beginning, an incredible wealth building opportunity. But if you're not one of those people, the early adopters, the people with significant leverage to do it at scale, the ones who are committed to it as real estate professionals. It would not surprise me if that passing interest that you have in owning an investment property in this town that you think is just going to boom in value is a project that after much thought, you decide to just leave on the shelf. Now, if you think I'm wrong or you want to hear what it would take for real estate to actually be a benefit, I sincerely hope that you'll be back next week for me to prove my case, because I promise you I'll be up to the task. I'll see you then.
Let's get some money.
From New Money, New Problems, this was the New Money, New Problems podcast, a show for successful professionals searching for the tools they need to navigate financial opportunities and obstacles they've never seen.